What did you see in someone's home that told you, yep, they're rich? Story 1. A kid I was friends with in high school. His parents had a new house custom built. Huge house, custom woodwork, beautiful details throughout. Very expensive. I used to go over and hang out with my friend, swim in the pool, watch movies in their theater, etc. But despite all that, the thing that stood out to me was this. One day I walked in and there's a brand new Steinway grand piano in the living room. His mom says she wanted to learn to play the piano, so they bought one. I play piano. Steinway pianos are amazing. They play beautifully and sound wonderful. Every Steinway piano is handmade in only one of 2 locations in the world. They're like the Rolls-Royce of pianos. This piano probably cost over $100,000, and they bought one just because she wanted to learn to play. Story 2. College friend who had a thick southern accent and generally put out a country boy vibe, though he lived in the DC suburbs of Maryland, invited us to his parents' house on the border of West Virginia so we could go skiing at Snowshoe. We figured tar paper shack, the 3-story wall of windows looking out on 300 feet of frontage on Deep Creek Lake, was a giveaway that country boy was not what he seemed. On a sad note, I'm going to his memorial party on Friday. He passed away in a freak home accident on January 3rd. I've known him now for almost 40 years. This is the big get-together of his college friends. His funeral was small, family only, and it will be a party, because he was the kind of guy who inspired that, expecting over 100 equally close friends to attend. Story 3, I was driving to a classmate's house for a school project. I drove up and knocked. No one answered. I called and she answered. I explained I was at their front door. She said, "Oh, you're probably at the barn. Keep driving up the hill. You'll see the house." By house, she meant chateau. Turns out her dad was from Switzerland and owned several construction companies. Their house was actually featured on the Grimm TV show, featured in the Portland, Oregon area. They were super kind, and I became like an adopted son. I loved sitting for them. Story 4. Did work on a summer home for $3 million. Did the ventilation on that house that sat on a cliff by the ocean. The house was double the size of an average home. An infinity pool that was heated all year. Mind you that it is in Sweden where winters can get quite cold. Don't want to know the cost for having it heated all year. The chandelier at the main hall did cost around $20,000 and not a single sharp edge on the house. Every wall was curved in some way. Story 5. This isn't something I noticed immediately, but I visited a mansion once and the owner was telling me about his HVAC system. He has a geothermal HVAC system, which basically means that they had to dig multiple wells underground, 90 feet into the earth, because the air down there is always a constant temperature. He said they drilled 9 of these wells in total, so basically they are using the temperature of the earth to heat and cool their house. The whole system cost him $100,000. Of all the crazy stuff in that house, this one fascinated me the most. Story 6. This one is really silly, but we went to a boss's house for a team party. The whole thing was catered by their private chef. Then we went downstairs to check out his whiskey collection and had a bottle that was unearthed on a dude's property dated back to the Civil War. We each got to try like half a shot, basically a sip. Then we went to his garage and it was full of pinball machines and arcade games. I half-jokingly asked, "Where's your Ferrari, dude?" Because I knew he owned one. He straight-faced said, "I own a townhouse across the street and park it there because my driveway here is too steep and it bottoms out." All that said, the very nice and generous host is just rich as hell. Story 7. I used to clean houses 10 years ago, so some of this may no longer be true, but these are my observations. Rich people still have landline phones. Typically, they'll have at least one cordless phone on every floor. Rich people are pretty old-fashioned when it comes to a lot of things. Like they'll have analog clocks instead of digital ones. The guest bedroom that they don't even use will have its own bathroom. They have a ton of small frame pictures in every room and lots of knickknacks that will break if you look at them wrong. They freak out if they think you scratched their stove or some other appliance that's made out of stainless steel. Stuff like that will ruin their day. I never once saw a desktop computer. Rich people will be convinced that their house is a disgusting mess when it's actually pretty much spotless. Our office was located directly across from a homeless camp. It was always pretty jarring to go from seeing that to being in a house that had 6 full-size bathrooms. Working there made me realize that the rich live in a completely different world from the rest of us. Story 824 karat gold Gucci door handles to enter their penthouse, which overlooked a famous PGA golf course. Of course, this was after I was flown in on their private jet. after I was picked up in their Rolls-Royce limousine. My driver wore a cap, tuxedo with tails, and white leather driving gloves. Like in the movies, I was treated like a princess over a long weekend. It really made it difficult to fly back to my measly apartment, change into my nursing whites, and do a 12-hour night shift the day I returned home. All of that because I took care of a family member who had been hospitalized, and they wanted to thank me for my compassion and care. I did nothing extraordinary but give care to a rather sick grandparent. The same kind of care I hope my own grandparents would receive if they were hospitalized. Story 9 went over for a party the day we graduated high school. We all went to school in the very southwest part of the Sacramento Valley, which is already expensive, but this girl lived in Napa Valley. I pull up and immediately notice the property is gated and there's a drive. Not a driveway, a drive. I park my car, get out, and knock on the front door. Her mom, who I've known for years since she was my mom's friend, answers and says, "Oh, it's right around the corner in the garage, sweetie. Have fun." The garage was an 8-car detached garage about a quarter mile away from the actual house. It had a loft, an insanely good sound system, and a full working bar in the garage. Story 10. My friend's dad owns a bunch of McDonald's and runs the corporate office in our state, and I was friends with his son. His dad and mom went out of town for a night, and my friend invited us all over for the Tyson Holyfield fight in high school. I'm 40 now. There were like 15 of us there, and his dad packed the fridge with Coronas and left a box of Cuban cigars, but also kind of hired a few older teenagers to kind of keep us in check. Also told everyone's parents what was happening. Nobody was allowed to drive home, obviously. The older teens drank just a tiny bit and also had fun with us, but also slept over. Their house was an absolute mansion, obviously. I remember being 16 or 17, not sure actually, and smoking my first cigar and sipping on a Corona on the back elevated deck, just shooting the shit with friends overlooking a lake, thinking, geez. So this is kind of a privileged life? We all got drunk, but mostly behaved. Also drunkenly made out with my crush at the time. And the babysitters did a good job. We all slept over in any and all rooms, and then my friend brought us all breakfast in the morning. All of our parents picked us up that late morning, and it was probably the best party I've ever been to. I passed out on the way home to my parents saying, "That's a one-time thing, by the way." Ah, the olden days. Story 11. I did a couple of gigs at Bill Gates' Summer Palace compound out on Hood Canal. The crew was fed in the tent we erected on the tennis court, which was to be the dining facility for the 200-odd guests at the party we were installing. One lunch break, I was munching my sandwich near the Tennis Cabana's wet bar, and I took a closer look at the cabinetry. The under-sink cabinet door was 24 inches wide and made from a single quarter-sawn piece of clear vertical grain Douglas fir. It had no knots, and the grain was as tight and straight as if it had been drawn with a delousing comb. No one has felled a tree from which that piece of wood might have come in about a century. I remember thinking, that's a hell of a piece of wood to be using on an undersink cabinet in a tennis cabana. They must have bought 100 old barns and sifted through all the lumber, choosing only the choicest cuts to build that 7-building compound. Story 12. I built houses in a gated golf course community. Our clientele was retired people from New York. I'd get invited in to see what they looked like after they moved in. They were mostly gaudy and flashy, but I'd be polite. One guy invited me in and showed me his house, including his 6-foot porcelain tiger with gold details. Wild, but not the thing that got me. He showed me this piece of iron. It honestly looked like a giant piston head with some tooling on it. Just a brown piece of a machine. He told me in great detail how it was the first one built for some factory that made something I'd never heard of. He described how he got into the same business, and his factory's machines were based on that machine, so when that factory closed, he had to have it. He called the owner and paid $50,000 for it, then paid machinists to take it apart. $50,000 for a knee-high chunk of a machine sitting in the corner of his foyer across from his porcelain tiger.